Sound check, sound check. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the regular meeting, the Electoral Area Services Committee, to order. I'd just like to quickly note that this meeting is taking place in the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples. I'd like to welcome Alternate Director Morris to the table today, and we will be welcoming Alternate Director Salmon in a few moments. I'd received an email from him that he will be a little bit late arriving. And with that, everyone has had an opportunity to peruse the agenda that's been published. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented unless there's any new items? Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? And those opposed? Motion carries. Minutes from our regular meeting of June 20th. There's a recommendation. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of June 20th, 2018 be adopted.
We have a mover. Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Dory. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And those opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Blackwell, any business arising from the minutes?
There's no business arising.
Next is number 4, public input period. And the procedure is on the board, and would like to ask if anyone would like to provide the committee with input on items on the agenda today. Welcome. Press the button, speak into the microphone, and you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Electoral Area Service Directors. The Saltaire Community Centre building lease renewal and funding request. In a few months, on the 20th of October, a new CVRD Area G Director will be elected. I am considering running. The Society 5-year lease, 5-year agreement for service, and additional funding of $75,000 are all election issues in Saltaire. There are many options available that do not involve Saltaire taxation. This is not about the society that has spent time working on the interior of the building, but about Saltaire taxpayers having a democratic say for a director that will find solutions for these issues that impact Saltaire taxation funds. The new director should not be encumbered by a decision made today. The new director needs to be included in the participation of these decisions at the Electoral Area Service Committee meetings. Based on the 29th of November 2017 CVRD board motion of first funded by $130,000 Community Works gas tax, there is no $75,000 community gas tax funds remaining from the emergency work that is now finished. In October 2017, the residents of Saltaire brought forward a community petition signed by over 600 residents requesting the CVRD board to hold a referendum to allow all Saltaire residents to have a say with regards to their taxation funds and area grant funds being spent on the building. A building that was bought without due diligence inspection by the CVRD, and after waiting 3 years, a conditional assessment was done. But even now, after this report was brought forward to this committee a year ago, there has been no CVRD engagement with the Saltaire community. I ask you to press pause and wait for the new Area G director to participate in these decisions that impact the Saltaire taxpayers' funds, the Saltaire taxpayers only, none of your areas. I thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to provide some input to the committee today on matters on the agenda?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to R3 and specifically to the public hearing request in it and the identified directors that are appointed to attend this come from my area I, F, and D. It's for a second time in a short period of time that Director Allison Nicholson, who represents Area E, has been excluded from this. I don't know how the delegates or directors are selected to attend these functions, but I think due to the close relationship that Area E has with F and the implications for things that happen in and around the lake and how they affect the Cowichan River, that I would respectfully request that our Area E Director Allison Nicholson be added as a delegate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to provide input to the committee?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. On R1, which will be coming up today for decision, I noticed that a fish-bearing stream was, or a fish stream was damaged, and warning was given out, and rectification or remediation of the area will take place. And there's a couple of questions. One, if the contractor can go out and damage a stream that feeds a fish-bearing stream, and there's no penalty, what kind of a signal is this sending to the rest of the contractors in the CVRD Valley? This is the second time it's happened, because it's happened again up on Van Horn Creek. The remediation was supposed to take place. It did take place in sort of not a very good way. The site is still eroded today, still contaminating the stream. So when this board is looking at this today, I would hope that you would look at it and see if there's some follow-up to ensure that the work is done. It's great that the remediation looks good on paper, but who's going to follow up? So we would like to see that. The other thing is I noticed the water is coming from a private company. It's 145 meters from the property, and I take that water will be coming out of Shawnigan Lake. Shawnigan Lake 5 years ago was at the tipping level. Otherwise, there's a lot more water being drawn out today. Under the Water Act, is this licensee going to be authorized to take how many more liters of water out of there every day? So there are just some things that the members might like to look at today when this goes through. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to provide input to the committee? Please come forward, speak into the microphone.
Hello, folks. My name is Larry Jorgensen from Shawnigan Lake, and there's a couple of items here that are bothersome to me. First of all it's the address 1500 Shawnigan Mill Bay Road, which Cliff has just mentioned to you about. The people that own the property have stated flatly that they had bought the property years ago with the sole purpose of subdividing it, period. The subdivision that they want to do is in non-compliance with existing zoning as it stands right now. Other properties surrounding it are also in non-compliance, but this one will half that again of the surrounding properties. In other words, they want to go down to 0.2 and 0.25 instead of 1/2, which is, again, although contrary to the original zoning, has been allowed. Secondly, as Cliff has mentioned, this contractor has willfully destroyed the land along that little ditch or stream, whichever you want to call it. Clearly, this is a novice, has no consideration for the rest of the community and what it wants. And secondly, does not address the affordable housing challenge that the board is facing. What he wants to do is pick up an easy $750,000, 3 new lots, subdivide them, sell them, that's it. The community doesn't get any benefit whatsoever. We need some lower cost housing. If you're going to permit non-compliance within your present zoning, get some benefit out of it. Get us some reasonable housing costs. In other words, we don't need another $750,000 or $1 million houses plunked on that property. We need property that people can afford. Now then, secondly, I'll make this quick. Mr. Chairman, your district, you have a 10-acre request for rezoning into 10 parcels of land right along your highway, okay? Yes?
Not my area, but continue.
Okay, Lake Cowichan, okay? Again, they are going to be divided up into 10 lots. $1 million houses are going to be going up on that property. You cannot waste your land like this. It is that simple, okay? Right now,
20 seconds.
okay. For instance, at the south end of Sydney, they have a Hawthorne Village, nice patio homes, sold out with no problem. Nice density, yards, everything else. $300,000 or less. What's going to go on this property? $1 million properties. You people are struggling to see affordable housing for our young people. We can't do it this way.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Okay, so in other words, please think about this. Deny the 2 requests. The 3rd request there is on Strathcona, and I am ambiguous one way or another.
Thank you very much.
Okay?
I believe we have time for one more, if there's anyone else wants to provide input to the committee. Ask a second time. Seeing none, let's proceed to the next item. We have delegations today, and for item D1, I'll turn to Director Yanni DiNardo to introduce the delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Don Bright, and he can also introduce the other gentleman beside him. Don has been working diligently in Cowichan Bay, so I'd like to welcome him, and he's going to be presenting from the Cowichan Bay Seniors Community Association, and it's something that we've talked about a lot, and he'll be explaining today. So welcome to Don.
Thank you very much.
Don can speak into the microphone, please. No, it's still off.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, and Laurie, and I would like to introduce Bob Reckhow, who's a member of our planning committee and also on our board of directors. On behalf of the Cowichan Bay Seniors and Community Association, we would like to express our appreciation to come here. This could be a little longer than 10 minutes. I wonder if, Mr. Chairman, if I could request another 5 minutes.
Turn to the committee. Is there any, go ahead.
Okay. On your monitors, you will note that the objectives of the Cowichan Bay Seniors and Community Association is on there. For the purpose of this presentation, I would like to discuss the objectives of our association. Note that we are now have a veritable recognition as a legal entity. We are under the BC Societies Act. So the first one, to create an inclusive community and with strong social infrastructure, is a part of our official community plan and as a goal set by our community members. I think that is fairly clear cut. So I'll go on to the next one. To plan for the building of a community center. Now, this is also in our official community plan. I have made presentation to this group before, so you probably know the circumstances we're in Cowichan Bay. We have no community center. Furthermore, we don't have any public building or church hall or service club hall to serve. In other words, we have absolutely no building suitable for a community center. The second problem is that we have no public land upon which to build a community center. So what we're our situation is that to build a community center, we have to have land, and we have to buy that land, and of course we have to raise funding for any development on that land. Now, there should be no questions here as to the necessity of a community center. We have many seniors in our area who are what we call landlocked. In other words, if they don't drive, have other means of transportation, they have to go right down to Cowichan Bay Road to get on public transit. And many of them are not able to do this. Also, don't have to discuss the possibility of the loneliness of seniors, which of course can lead to Alzheimer's, dementia, and furthermore, further psychological problems. And I know that you people are concerned about seniors because what we got 25% of seniors in the Cowichan Valley, and it's supposed to go up to 25% in a not too distant future. Our association's third objective is to advocate and negotiate for a realistic and safe emergency assembly location. As you know, Cowichan Bay wasn't planned, it happened. It happened along the estuary edge from Cherry Point and way up past the end of the village. I don't know how many miles that'd be or how many kilometers, but considerably. What is not well known is that under that very highly populated area, there is a minor seismic fault. Now, don't get misled by the term minor here. The tsunami in Japan was caused by a minor earthquake and a minor fault. The more recent one in Mexico, central Mexico, was also the result of a minor fault, and which killed quite a few people and damaged an awful lot of property. When you're dealing with tectonic forces, those forces are pretty well unimaginable to what we think about here. So there is no such thing as a minor seismic fault, only in the sense that seismologists use that term. You have all of us heard of the slogan, if you want to call it, not if, but when. Now, I have been involved in a rescue and emergency preparation in a magazine in Alberta before I came here. I was also, my wife and I were also taught school in the Northern Territories in schools built by the Emergency Measures Organization, which, if some of you go back far enough, you'll remember that. It was a program. The schools were equipped with extra storage for potable water, extra storage for sewage. All of these were pump out, of course, because this is in granite structures. And also backup generators. And if you're looking at a emergency shelter, surely to goodness, you have to have those procedures in place. Okay. Now,
Don, just before you go on, you're well into your allotted time, and just so you know, all the directors have all of the material that you provided to us, so just wanting to let you know that you've got, I think you want to get to an ask at the end here, so I'm just giving you that heads up that we've got all of this information
okay.
in hand.
You do have,
Go ahead.
you have in your hands the objectives, and you have the pictures or photographs of our present emergency shelter location. Open picnic shelter without any heat and so on. Now, moving people in from a damaged area, houses down, maybe in fire and so on, and, you know, into a situation like that is looking for more trouble. Now, you also have in your hand, or on your, available to you, a history of my search for land upon which to build. And I have exhausted all possibilities of non-ALR, privately owned land. And so we are forced to go to ALR land. We have found a very socially minded couple who are willing to have a community center built upon their land. What we need now is your permission to do this. In other words, we cannot, I'll get out of your way in a minute, Jimmy. We must have your consent to make any application to ALR, or the Agricultural Land Commission. Now, this land is for community use. Okay? In other words, this is for the benefit and the welfare and the safety of people in the Cowichan Bay community. So I would highly ask you, and ask you, the EAC here to please strongly consider this, and we hope approve it. And by the way, this does not negate your considerations of the importance of ALR land. What it does do is say there are some other issues for immediate public safety and welfare and so on that maybe preempt this 5.5 acres that we're considering. Thank you very much.
Hang on, we may have some questions for you. Turn to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking, we don't normally make any decisions on the fly with the delegation anyway, so just for process, this is just something you're giving us all the information, so I'm just letting you know that's how it is. But now we do have your information and your ask, and I'll check with staff afterwards on that. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
It's very important.
Director Acton. Hang on, Don.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great presentation, and I know that community space is sought after by every community, so obviously something that you guys need. I was curious, were you planning on this being a CVRD run community center or something? Do you picture something more like the hub?
Well, we have a zoning bylaw in our OCP, which is called Parks and Institutional. Now, the Parks and Institutional would of course be community normally, But also in that zoning is that for a nonprofit organization, to be able to fund this, the only thing that we could come up with is we need to build a co-op housing project on that property. And this will help fund, and by the way, that has to be a nonprofit organization, and that is definitely what it is. By the way, this also has significance for subsidized housing and low-cost housing, and a place for seniors to retire in the community, and so on.
Follow-up, Director Acton?
Great, that sounds like an excellent idea. So have your group met with Amy Melmock in Economic Cowichan, and maybe you guys have already been discussing these ideas with CVRD?
I'll ask Lori to answer that.
Director Yanni DiNardo?
Yes, we have discussed this, and actually, it's very innovative design that Don has come up with, because he wants community center in with the building, and we've been speaking to different co-op associations, and like Don said, the biggest challenge in Cowichan Bay is now land. And of course, in our OCP, ALR is prized and very valuable. So that is why, and Don was actually a member of our OCP, so he knows that as well. But they've been very creative and trying to move forward, and now they have a society, so that's where we're at. And we also been working with Amy.
So you're funding too, like, do you have a function for this already, or like?
There is no function. No.
Is there plans to have a function, or?
No, the only
Nope.
way that Dawn has been working with this is director's grant and aid for little bits of different things that they've been applying for.
The development.
Hang on. Very preliminary. This questions, are there any other questions for the delegation? So, Don, I really want to thank you I know you've been a passionate crusader for getting a community center, an emergency reception center in your community. I know you worked with the director a lot, and I acknowledge your passion and your commitment to this, and I expect we'll hear more from you and your director in the months ahead as we get something a little more formalized. So thank you very much for appearing today. Delegation number 2. Lynn Smith on the Salt Air Water Advisory Committee. Lynn, will 10 minutes be sufficient?
If I require more, are you in favor of?
We'll let you know
the
at
time?
10 minutes. How's that sound? See where you're at. Floor is yours.
No, I think it belongs to the CVRD, the floor. Anyhow, I'm here because it's an urgent need request. The UBCM resolution for equitable funding for all mandated filtration systems. There are open water sources in British Columbia that all require financial assistance for their mandated filtration systems. I did create a resolution. It may not be correct, but we're asking that it be taken to the UBCM to ask, whereas the financial burden for all mandated filtration systems require fair allocation of provincial and federal funds to all open water sources systems to provide safe drinking water. This slide you have already seen in your package. Would anyone like me to continue that reading of that one? Anyhow, it doesn't matter if you're a big fish or a little fish. It all costs taxpayers' funds, and everyone is looking for their pocket to maybe be 50-50. Island Health has a mandate of 4321 so that we all drink healthy water, water that is risk-free of viruses, parasites, bacteria, that meet the BC Drinking Water Protection Act, the drinking water regulations, to provide secure water supply of reliable, high-quality drinking water for decades to come, to eliminate turbidity, and many have been within the province on boil water advisories. Mandated filtration systems, they need financial assistance from the province who under the health has mandated these. Small systems, large systems, they all need fair and equitable funding. Nanaimo, Ladysmith, they both received provincial and federal funding. Ladysmith received a $9 million grant for a $15 million filtration system. That's 60% funding. Nanaimo received also a large amount. Now, I bring Saltaire water system to you because I'm most familiar with that system, and we are a small system. We've been under the CVRD engineering department for 32 years. We've had engineers responsible for our system, technicians responsible for our systems, and the Saltaire taxpayers have funded all of that, with approximately 860 parcels being involved in it. Now, in 2012, we worked on increasing our Saltaire water taxation to look at our leaky pipes, our breaking pipes, and we needed to spend money on the upgrade system. Aging infrastructure happens, and we step forward as a community, and we pay approximately an additional $358 per parcel. So we're looking at $4.5 million over 15 years to do approximately a third of the work that is required. So this isn't just about the Saltaire water system. I only used it as an example. Here's some other ones that are on the Island Health mandated filtration systems list. Shawnigan Lake water system, I believe that that's a $5 to $6 million. The Union Bay Improvement District is also $2 million. Improvement districts cannot apply for grants. English River Water System has approximately 15 millions. Comox has 110. And Saltaire, we're in there in the mix. So this is a chance for you as directors at the CVRD to show commitment to safe drinking water for all in British Columbia and to seek funding that works for everyone, whether it's small or large. This is a priority of the CVRD and the CVRD directors. Safe drinking water should not be a financial burden for some systems and a lottery win for other systems. Why the urgency? Island Health mandated filtration system installations are time sensitive. Time is running out. Equitable financial funding for all mandated filtration systems. Everyone deserves high quality drinking water. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I ask that you take this resolution forward to the UBCM. I know that I understand as yesterday the staff explained that the time limit had gone by for taking something to the UBCM, but this is an urgent need, and I believe you can take an urgent need forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Is there any questions for the delegation? Director Yanni DiNardo?
I was going to ask, the deadline wasn't it last week or the week before?
Deadline is passed.
Okay, and so there are special consideration for there could be late resolutions if you.
Very specific guidelines as to what qualifies for a late resolution.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Next item, correspondence C1. We'll just take a moment. We have C1 Grant and Aid Electoral Area E. Mr. Blackwell, would you please read the recommendation?
Excuse me. Recommendation for C1 is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid electoral area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora, in the amount of $3,000 be provided to Community Policing Advisory Society to support crime prevention in Area E, specifically Block Watch and Speed Watch.
Turn to the director for the area. Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? We've got Director Yanni DiNardo, followed by Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question. I don't understand how, I know that Area D is in the community policing, advisory policing function. Is Area E, are they going to be joining that function? Or they're just paying for a service? I've never seen this before, so I don't know who to ask.
See staff jumping up, ready to answer. Director Nicholson, would you like to respond to Director Yanni DiNardo?
Area E is currently not part of the community policing service. However, for the past 3 years, and this will be the 4th year, I've been providing a grant and aid to the Community Policing Association so that they would support Neighborhood Watch, and now I've increased the amount so that they will also support the Speed Reader Board for our area.
Follow-up, Director Yanni DiNardo?
So will you be joining us in that function? If you've been supporting it, you've been putting money into it for 3 years, but not into the function, will you be joining the function?
Director Nicholson?
To join the function, we would have to go to an AAP or a referendum, and I don't believe the timing is right for a referendum, and I am not comfortable doing an AAP at this time.
Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. Mr. Blackwell, C2.
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $500 be provided to Cowichan Lake and District Chamber of Commerce to support the Mobile Visitor Center trailer program and community promotion wrapper with co-sponsors Area I, Town of Lake Cowichan, and Lake Cowichan First Nation.
Could we get somebody to move that? Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. C3.
The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake South, Scotts Falls, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to First Lake Cowichan Scouts to support the skill building and youth development goals for the 25 to 35 youth registered in clubs and Cubs and Scouts for 2018-2019.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by alternate Director Morris. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. C4, Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to First Lake Cowichan Scouts to support the skill building and youth development goals for the 25 to 35 youth registered in Cubs and Scouts for 2018 and 2019.
Moved by Director Kuhn, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor and those opposed, that motion carries. Number 7, information. Everybody's had an opportunity to peruse these. Any discussion? Seeing none, reports. R1. Mr. Munn. The lectern is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members, staff, guests. I'll just state right off the first application we're dealing with here. The applicant is in attendance if you want to ask questions to the applicant. Now, the location, let's just fast forward here. There we go. I'm presenting on application development permit 18B04 at 1500 Shawnigan Mill Bay Road. This is the location of the property. This is in the western part of the Shawnigan Village containment boundary and the development permit area. And the application was referred to staff as a subdivision, and after attending in the early part of the year, you'll notice some of the pictures following were taken in around February. It was noticed that there had been clearing done prior to development permit being issued. So this triggered a violation under the Water Sustainability Act, and a small fine was levied. The application is for a 4-lot subdivision. You can see faintly on the map that a stream does flow through. It's an unnamed tributary to Henderson Creek, which is a tributary of Shawnigan Creek, which then flows toward saltwater where there's a fish ladder, so that becomes fish-bearing waters. And hence the development permit area is primarily for riparian protection and those fish-bearing aspects. The site photos here show the subject property from Shawnigan Mill Bay Road. And as I mentioned, this was taken a few months ago, and that was the condition of the property on the visit. So that you can see that the clearing had taken place up to and including the stream. Those yellow arrows represent the pathway of the stream. It's a bit hard to see in the photo, and there's some blue tags there that surveyed the location of the stream itself. Now, a riparian area assessment was done of the property after the clearing was done. It identified a 10-meter SPIA, which is a streamside protection enhancement area. That's shown in green here. The larger hatched area is the 30-meter assessment area. You're probably familiar with that. And as a result of that, a riparian assessment was done and a landscape plan proposed for remediation of the damaged area. So that's shown in the heavily planted area, you can see, and some additional links are provided to other natural areas to enhance the connectivity of the natural area and serve as a stormwater function. So we have that, let me just go back one actually, to this plan. You may want to take a further look at that. In any case, the landscape plan was provided by a BC certified landscape architect, which has more surety of its completion to what is shown there. That's an important part of this. Accompanying that is an erosion and sediment control plan. As you can see, the north side of the replanted area, there will be a fence there, and stormwater mitigation, siltation fencing and so on will be provided, so no runoff from construction site will enter the stream. So to conclude the recommendation, I'll read the recommendation if that's okay.
Any questions for staff on this item? Director Dory?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions contain information about the bond that they would have to post to ensure that the rehabilitation of the riparian area is done, and what would be the formula for figuring out that bond in view of the fact that they've already had one violation on this property. Is there any kind of strategy that's used there?
Okay.
Mr. Munn?
Two questions, basically. First, regarding the violation, that was a small fine levied by the ministry in charge. I believe that was Forest, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. The remediation plan recommended replanting, And so landscape architect gave an estimate of the planting cost. And the landscape policy we have dictates that that amount be multiplied by 125%. So they provide a bond equal to that amount, and then when it is planted, 70% of that amount is returned, and then a period after, I believe 1 to 2 years, if everything is planted in accordance and survives, then the remainder of the bond is returned.
Thank you.
I've got Director Yanni DiNardo and Acton. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Munn. So this is just never ending, that it's always begging for forgiveness afterwards. Would this, through you, would the subdivision approving officer make a difference in this case? Because it just seems awfully familiar with other cases, so.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. So, yeah, perhaps I can jump on this one and offer these thoughts that no, the subdivision approving officer would not prevent this type of thing, but what would happen with the subdivision approving officer and the associated engineering that goes with that is that the follow-up piece, ensuring that the silt fencing is maintained in good condition, that it's not getting inundated with sand and particulate matter such that it fails, and that, as you've seen in Cowichan Bay Estates, there will be a qualified professional to monitor that. Currently, the CBRD doesn't provide that function and relies solely on the owner's engineer, if there is one, to monitor this.
Just a follow-up.
Follow-up?
Yeah, what was the ministry's fine for this? Do you know the amount of a fine that the ministry?
I don't know the exact amount.
Okay, and then the remediation, who follows up on remediation?
There would be a remediation, there is a remediation plan, landscape plan, and a monitoring plan in association with that. And part of the registered landscape architect's responsibility is to ensure those plantings are done in accordance with the society and professional standards.
So just CVRD follow up at all after this? It's just left to the professionals?
I think the answer was the professionals. And just a note that I understand the report's just been provided to the provincial government on the professional reliance model and just came out last week according to our MLA, so that'll be an interesting read for all of us over the summertime. I've got Directors Acton followed by Nicholson.
Hi, John. So I'm curious about some of the wording here, and then there was comments from the public that perhaps the lots were too small. So my understanding is that this went to MOTI before, and there was gonna be one extra lot on top of that, so that I can't remember the dimensions of what those lots were gonna be. And then looking on Google Maps, it looks to me like there's lots of subdivisions going up in that area between the village to the highway that are creating some smaller pieces of land. And there was comment about that affordable housing, and is this not something that we're striving for in our OCP? And
Is that a question for staff or a topic of discussion?
I think it's misleading here that some of it, that it's not in, it's misleading that it's not in formation of the community of what the community wants, when there's nothing here that I can see that says it's going against zoning or it's going against the OCP. And then I'm curious, what did MOT would have approved? What size lots are being approved in that area?
Mr. Munn.
I can clarify some of that. In the beginning, when the applicant applied to the Ministry of Transportation for a subdivision, they had an old survey plan which they calculated could be subdivided into 5 lots according to the zone requirements. And then it was discovered afterwards that the plan didn't include dedications for road and so on over the years when the plan wasn't updated. So that required a new survey, and less land was discovered as a result. So 4 lots resulted instead of 5, and that had to be re-looked at by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Then it came to us again for our referral, and that's when our process started.
What exactly is the minimum lot size for that area?
I believe it's 2,000 square meters. Do you want to know the exact size of the lots? Or
But technically speaking, we're not discussing the subdivision, we're discussing the development permit. So if we could keep our questions as relating to the development permit and the recommendation before us. Director Nicholson.
I have several questions. Just so I'm clear on, we talked about, this is the professionals deal with monitoring, is that correct?
Mr. Munn?
yes, there are several professionals involved in this, combination of engineers, landscape architects, and biologists. The biologists did the remediation plan and contributed to what the landscape architect set out as a planting plan. And according to the landscape architect professional standards, that needs to be inspected. The biologist also has obligations regarding the riparian assessment, and the full aspect of the riparian assessment includes monitoring and follow-up.
So 2 years down the road, we'll be assured that this will be a successful remediation?
There will be monitoring done to assess whether that's done commencing after planting. So planting could take place in the fall, and the timeline follows what happens in the course of development and the other timelines proceeding, like the landscape policy.
So I'm just trying to make sure that there's no cost to the CVRD for this, and I'm wondering why we entertain development permits before we're assured that the place is being remediated.
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. So the development permit is for the remediation. With regard to your other questions, there is no assurance that the planting will succeed. There is some security set aside for that. That security should accommodate the cost to installing the vegetation. After that, a percentage, there's a calculus associated with the percentage that's returned, but there could be a catastrophic die-off of all of it for some reason. Regardless, if there is the need to cause the planting or replacement of a percentage of any failed planting within that area shown, there will be a cost to the CVRD in terms of staff time and maybe more to enforce the obligations under the development permit guideline, under the development permit area.
So that's a problem to me. On the front end, what could we have done better to have communicated the importance of maintaining riparian areas? It sounded to me when I read the report that the damage was done after they had put an application into the CVRD. So is there not an opportunity when they put an application in to make sure that they're clear they shouldn't do anything?
Is that Mr. Munn? That was how I read it, but
Sure.
is that the timeline?
There's a couple of steps here, and in this case, there were 3 steps, because they originally applied to the ministry for a 5-lot subdivision, and that would have been a referral to us, and then they had to redo that for the 4 lots because of their loss of land in calculation. So then that was prompted a staff referral again, going out and looking at the property, and because of that referral, it was noted that there had been damage done. And they had prepared to go to a development permit, which was noted in our first referral back to the ministry. So they knew that was coming up, but the clearing was done and a development permit was applied for, I believe, well, it was applied for after the damage was done.
So just to interject, and I'd like to keep everyone on the development permit and the nature of that. I, if I'm hearing what Director Nicholson's getting at, and I completely agree, we are essentially toothless in being able to prevent landscape degradation and clearing and in advance, and the only remedy is that they are required to apply for a development permit and to follow their professional input and recommendations to do the replanting. And there's not a heck of a lot that we as a regional district have the powers to be able to do beyond that. So, yep, nod from there, and I'll go to alternate Director Salmon, followed by Acton, and does anyone else want to get on this? Alternate Director Salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question about the proposed building envelope. It's page 8 on the riparian assessment report, if you could possibly pull that one up. Shows the septic and the proposed. Maybe just while you're doing that, because I had the same questions from local residents that Director Acton mentioned about lot size, and I think maybe you're referring to the OCP considerations at the beginning, where it talks about the lots closer to the boundary tend to be more rural, and these are going to end up as smaller lots than the surrounding lots. So I have the same concern, and that's what I've heard from. We live in the area, so hearing from local people. Well, a second thing while we're waiting that I noticed, as far as the creek, it's actually, I was surprised to read in the assessment, Henderson Creek, it's actually Hollings Creek that this runoff stream goes into. And I bring that up because the Mill Bay Conservation Group that stocks fish puts the fish directly into Hollings Creek. So, in fact, mud that from the strip bank that could potentially go from the runoff ditch directly into Hollings. So I think it's a bit more, maybe a bit closer to the fish than we might assume. Okay, so no, it's the one that shows these proposed.
Yeah, I just included one shot here of from the assessment. There's another, I didn't include the other shot in our slides here because it was somewhat misleading. The more accurate depiction really comes with the landscape plan, which is this one. And the gray area you see there is the potential building sites. You could build a building to its maximum size within those gray areas. They don't represent the maximum build-out size. So in the other report you're referring to, it has building envelopes outlined which aren't the same as this, and it includes some to the south of the stream in the let's just go back a bit here. In the area at the bottom of the screen, you know, there's a fair amount of lot area there, but in order for anyone to build in that area, they'd have to cross the stream, and that would require another go-round with the Water Sustainability Act, and it requiring permission from the ministry again to cross the stream.
Yes, but so assuming they don't do that and they build instead in the north of the stream, they're still going to be well into the 30-meter riparian assessment area.
Yes, that's the assessment area. The orange line there indicates, the dashed line indicates the streamside protection enhancement area. So they can't build within that area. They are permitted to build within the rest of the area. 30 meters is relevant when you're talking about septic fields, which can't be built within 30 meters.
So for lots 3 and 4, where will the septic fields go?
They would have to go outside the 30-meter area.
So is that enough space, that little bit of white that's left?
That's going to be up to the developer to determine which system they apply to that area, which technology they use.
So once again, I'm just gonna ask everyone to consider, we're not, as part of this development permit, my understanding is this meets minimum lot size according to zoning.
Yes.
So we're not even considering that at this point. It's asked and answered. The septic placement requirement is out of the Ministry of Health, our Island Health. And that what we have before us is the question of the replanting plan and the regulations and the application that before us is simply on that recommendation. So further questions to staff on the development permit. I've got Director Acton to close.
Just to clarify, Director Salmon quoted me as being concerned about the lot size. I wasn't concerned. What I was saying was I saw lots zooming out on Google Maps that there are lots of development at that size. But also I heard some insinuation of developers acting and then asking for forgiveness. So I'd like to have the opportunity to invite the applicants to speak. And also I do agree with Director Nicholson on the fact of what could CBRD do at the beginning, because these are new developers. And that is something that Director Clement is often referring to, is how can we help educate so that we are not put in these situations again.
Don't know that that's a question for staff. It's a problem we face across the region. People buy lots, they come in and they damage habitat, and then they come in after they've damaged habitat and ask for a development permit to fix it. Happens in your area, our area, happens all across the region. And yes, we're doing everything we can, and we've got plans for campaigns and signage and the likes to make people fully aware that what they're doing is contrary to the riparian regulations. But how we can go beyond that, we have no legislative tools enabled to prevent it. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. I should also point out that, exclusive of this situation, but as a general statement, given my experience in the land development industry, oftentimes it's advantageous to remove something you don't like and pay the fine as a cost of doing business, because the replanting situation has greater aesthetic value or whatever. So what I'm trying to suggest is that there's only a certain degree to which you can affect change in the behavior of folks in the development industry. Those that have any experience in the development industry know that you knock on the door of the associated local government first before you do anything, to understand what the expectations are vis-a-vis development applications and so forth. But that only goes so far.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, are there any questions for the applicants? Seeing none. Oh, Director Acton, could we have the applicants come up and to the lectern, please? And can we have the microphone turned on?
Marcel Stemkins.
Matt Seger.
Hi, guys. So I think these applicants are aware that their application doesn't read well, so I wanted to hear their side of the story too.
Do you have a question for the applicants?
Well, I guess how can they ensure, or I believe that development is a relationship that is something that we need. And it's great to have some small development happening for some affordable if it's smaller, it's affordable, or more affordable than what's 1 acre lots with $1 million mansions on them. And so what I would like to know is it true? Could we have done something differently on our end in order to educate yourselves so that this we wouldn't be here today debating on a stream? And is there something that can assure us that
Why don't we take the first question?
It's going to be.
First question, is there something that the regional district could have done in advance that might have made this read better?
I guess it was about a year and a half ago. I'm not going to go on a story. I'm just going to say what happened or the miscommunication. But yeah, what the regional district could do better. I mean, a year and a half ago, when we purchased the property, I actually went to CVRD, not once, not twice, but 3 different times, and had for this exact reason. Because first of all, I'm not a developer. We're not developers. We're 3rd generation Shawnigan residents, and I know, it does show bad because when we bought the property, it was a desert. There was not a speck of water in there to be seen. Now that doesn't negate from what happened, but what it does do is, quite honestly, there's no way that we can navigate. There's no navigation for what a new person in development can do to get to the final solution. It's a hard thing to teach yourself and learn. So as far as the miscommunication, I went in there 2 times for sure, strictly to do with this, and a 3rd time to the front counter. And like I say, in no way do I blame planners or et cetera on what I was told. But the questions I asked were what I assumed. Can I log my property? Can I dig on my property? It's my property. I own it. I'm not developing. I'm exploratory. I'm digging dirt. What's in my property? Is it solid rock? Can I do these things? And they're answering my questions. My questions were, oh, yeah, you can log your property. Yeah, you can dig on your property. Great. Was I not asking the right questions? Maybe. Where am I going to dig? I did ask, is there any waterways on this property? Is there any riparian on this property? And as far as the limited mapping in such a big world that shows where these things go, my answers were nothing that we can see here. The GIS from the top with the trees was as close as I could get to someone showing me what the topographical was. Obviously, there's a low area in the property. But when I was there in September, when we were on the property and we did the logging and we did that stuff, there was no water to be found. There's no different than a ditch as far as, and there was no water, period. It's just a low area where water may migrate through. But to our knowledge and my questions, we had absolutely no intention of it being anything short of cutting down the snag trees that were dangerous, which is almost 90% of the area was alder. And the wind that goes through there, they're already falling down. So some of the trees we had logged at the top, we logged, which opened up winds. So we took out the rest of the snags that were extremely dangerous, which you can see in the picture. But the lowest area of the property is still where any water would migrate, and the lowest area of the property is still where it is migrating. As far as the CVRD could do differently, yeah. Maybe not the CVRD. Maybe it's, as you said, legislation or some sort of power. But if I'd gone and there was a big red frickin' zone right to the lowest spot, I would have been like, okay, obviously. But it's really hard to navigate that. And like I say, I went in the most purest way, and you can ask every planner in CVRD the amount of hours I spent at that desk asking to make sure that, because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm new, but I'm not going anywhere either. And that's Mrs. Nicholson mentioned about making sure that we're accountable. This happened. There was a huge misunderstanding or miscommunication, and we totally understand that. But there's a plan in place, and we would like to move forward, and we feel very comfortable with that plan and the level of professionalism behind that plan from Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Transport. There's a lot of people looking at this for a seasonal drainage way, ephemeral, and I feel like it is definitely being looked at in a serious manner. And if there's worries about bonding or anything, we don't have a problem. Like if there's an issue with money being spent after the fact, if we renege or the plants all die or we have the drought of a century, double our bond. Whatever you think it's going to cost to guarantee success of that remediation, we're all over that. I've lived my whole life in Shawnigan. Went to school in Shawnigan. I grew up in Shawnigan. My dad's been all over the valley, and I'm carrying that torch from him with my brothers. And if this is how we have to learn, it's a horrible way to learn, but we're going to stick it out. So we want to make sure we do it right.
Thank you. Question for the applicant, Director Salmon, alternate Director Salmon.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you didn't realize about the seasonal stream. Maybe just looking forward, though, to my question about what type of sewage treatment
it was a concern as well, because as one of the gentlemen here who's now left has mentioned about these lots confusion. Yeah, the lots do conform, obviously, else we wouldn't be here. But they are small lots, lots that we didn't obviously choose because we had no idea about the setbacks. And now we're faced with these small lots. People might even actually explain them as a mini home lot. They're actually very small. usable square footage is probably up to 2,000 square feet. The septic, there is, VHA has been there a couple times, and they have noted that same thing. Well, where are we going to put the septic? And there is technology out there to allow the footprint. On the chart that we had here, it does look really small when you're looking at it from 6,000 feet away, but when you're actually there and you see where you would build, there is 100%, they feel very comfortable. I'm not a professional in septic, but that they can design a treatment center that goes in the front yard or some sort of treatment in small square footage that can take care of that septic to ensure that the water that runs off that property, obviously to the lowest point being that ephemeral stream, is protected. So
Thank you.
it's not an issue for.
Just before we go to a follow-up, we have a very important process to protect here, and this is very specific to the development permit. And I just looked over at Mr. Blackwell. We have to stick to the questions that are pertinent to the development permit. Septic is not part of this. Lot size is not part of this. So can we just remind the committee members that we want to have a clean and defensible process, and let's keep to the questions surrounding the development permit application. Do you have a follow-up on that? Please do.
Just to confirm then, they're repairing, so that the 30 meter, so you are, for those two lots 3 and 4, the building will be in that riparian?
Yeah, to my understanding, because I'm not a professional in an environmental professional, but we have hired environmental professionals that are recognized by the province to talk and design. And I was confused on that as well. I saw those lines and I was like, well, how are we ever going to put a house on there? That is a SPIA area, an area in which water can migrate. Actually, it's a zone dictated by, I'm sure, government that we need to look at when looking at streams and ephemeral streams, et cetera. That is the assessment area as far as it goes out. It looks like it's actually like a great wall that we can't go into, but it's only the area assessed, which is, if I had that picture, you could see the replanting. That's why the replanting goes up the corridors between the houses to capture that, make sure that that area, if it's not affected, is actually reclamated all the way up to that SPIA. The house can be built there, but not infiltrating water, which is why the septics will be pushed to the front yard, which there is able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton?
This question is for Mr. Blackwell. I would just like to know if the DP requirements are met for this today.
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. Yes, in staff's view, the application conforms with the development permit guidelines, and on that basis, staff is of the view that it must be approved. Of course, that's at the discretion of this committee. If the committee disagrees and finds fault with some aspect of the development permit application, you must specify which guideline for the resolution, if it's in the negative, that the application does not conform with. Otherwise, if the view is that it is in conformance, then it must be approved.
Any further questions for the applicants? Seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming before us today. And turn to the director, or could I have Mr. Blackwell read the recommendation, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board. 1, that development permit application number DP 18B04 at 1500 Shawnigan Mill Bay Road be approved with the following requirements. 1, compliance with the recommendations contained in the attached documents D through H and the CVRD landscape policy. And 2, a restrictive covenant be registered on title of the subject property regarding compliance with the attached documents D through H prior to issuance of a building permit. And 2, that the general manager of land use services be authorized to permit minor revisions to the permit in accordance with the intent of DP guidelines of OCP bylaw number 2650.
Turn to the director for the area. Move the recommendation. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion on the resolution before us? Alternate Director Salmon.
So just to clarify, so we do have an option 2 there to deny. You're saying that what kind of, why is that there if we have no choice?
If the committee, I'll take that, if the committee has identified a specific development permit regulation or guideline that hasn't been met in our view, we can recommend denial based on that specific guideline not being met. Any further questions on the resolution? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion one opposed, the motion carries. Just for everybody's information, the resolutions coming out of today's meeting will go to the Wednesday, July 11th, 2018 board meeting. Next up are two, Ms. Herrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next item before you is a development permit application relating to a two-lot subdivision at 1691 Strathcona Heights Road. And a development permit is required as the property is located within the South Cowichan Rural Development Permit Area. So the subject property is located within Electoral Area B and is on the north side of Strathcona Heights Road. And this lot is currently 4 hectares or 10 acres and is zoned RR2, Rural Residential. And this is an aerial photo of the property and surrounding area. And the existing lot contains a single dwelling already, and that is sited on the east side of the lot. So this subdivision plan shows the parcel divided into 2 lots, and each lot is 2 hectares in area. The existing house will remain on proposed lot to B, and a new house will be constructed on proposed lot A. So there is a drainage course that was identified. It was an unmapped and it's an unnamed stream. It is subject to the RAR regulations, and that's located along the western property boundary. And the RAR report submitted with the application concluded that the proposed subdivision and the construction of the new dwelling on lot A will have no impact on the stream. This is a photo of the existing driveway access off Strathcona Heights, and it does slope down from the road. It's a very sloped property. The lots will share one driveway and will require an easement for access to secure access to proposed lot B. And this is a picture of the location of the proposed house. In general, it's not the whole view, but it will be slightly cut into the slope and extend onto a small flat clearing. And the building is also located adjacent to the existing driveway, and there's no extension of the driveway required. And this house is really not that far from the road, about 13 meters, a setback. And a report from a geotechnical engineer was submitted, and a review of potential hazardous conditions, and various recommendations were made around the site preparation, construction, and stormwater management. And the engineer stated that the land is safe for the intended use, subject to following their recommendations. So the purpose of this DP application is to deal with the applicable guidelines of the South Cowichan Rural DPA, and those guidelines have been addressed, and as such, staff is recommending approval. So that concludes my presentation, and the applicant is actually not here today, so they weren't able to make it.
Thank you for that report. So I guess you're going to have to take all the questions then, if the committee has any questions for you. Any questions on this application? Excellent. Turn to the director for the area. Move the recommendation. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Marcotte. Any further I guess I should get you to read it out, please. Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, 1, that development application number DP 18B08, located at 1691 Strathcona Heights, be approved, and 2, that the general manager of land use services be authorized to permit minor revisions to the permit in accordance with the intent of DP guidelines of OCP bylaw number 3510.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Herrera. Just before we go to the next item, I'd just like to take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and run through the rest. tell whose mind's been changed? One, two, three. Director Marcotte, would you join us, please? Well, I'm just going to get started in. Next item, R3, Mr. Batstone, please. Kathleen's not in the room.
Okay,
so-
thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Electoral Area Services Committee. I'm before you today presenting on behalf of Development Services application number 01I16RS, a rezoning application for a large lot on the north side of Lake Howichin to the west of Yubo. I will note before proceeding further that the applicants are in the room if you have any questions of them. I also understand that they may have some new information for interest to the committee in advance of making your decision. I understand this information has not been provided previously in written form, but it may be a good time to receive this as a reminder. I do have the slides available, but I will spare you unless requested to show the slides. I believe you've seen them before. You're intimately aware of the property, its history, and the nature of the application. So I will defer to the recommendation, which is for staff to receive information on the basis of a discussion by the committee, and simply reiterate the facts. They're before you. On page 2 of the report, there's some application status history, noting that the application was initiated more than a year ago, June 2017. Since that time, several committee decisions have been rendered, which has resulted in the application not moving forward. And the most recent history of interest, I will just read this out for you as a reminder. February 14th, 2018, the board refers back to staff to identify options, it being the application, before moving the application forward. And I will just read out for your awareness, and I can refer to that later, the actual board motion read as such. Motion 1884, it was moved and seconded that item 16, application 01I16RS, be referred back to staff for discussion with the applicant regarding possible options for moving forward with the application. To my understanding, again, as you know, the file was in the hands of Rochelle Rondeau, who's not available to be here today. The only actions taken as a consequence of that motion of the board was to, at the suggestion of the applicants, conduct a site visit, which occurred, again, noted on the second page of your report, on July 11th, 2018, at a time that committee members, staff, and the applicant conducted a site visit. There is no more information for staff to add at this time, so I will conclude my presentation with that.
Thank you, Mr. Batstone. Any questions for staff, noting that it's Ms. Rondeau's application, but questions through to staff, and we'll ask the delegates if they have any, or the applicants if they have anything to add afterwards. So Director Nicholson, followed by Yanni Donardo.
I just wondered if it would be worth Keith going through the slides, because we have two alternate directors here who may not be familiar with the file.
Turn to committee. What do you think? Does the committee want to see the slide deck? I got a 1, and how about the alternate directors? Would you like to see the slide deck? Okay, Keith, you're up. Sense of full disclosure. Let's make sure everybody knows what we're looking
Of course,
at.
I don't have any fireworks. Oh, no, there's a fireworks ban, I think. Okay, I'll look for my pom-poms.
Maybe we'll hold questions to the end. so that he can run through.
Okay, the subject for property is located in the middle of your screen. Look, it's approximately 10 hectares and crosses the public road right-of-way. The public road right-of-way bisects the property, is the best way to put that. It's adjacent to the Cowichan Lake on the north side of the road, on the north side of the lake. It is zoned forestry. It is also designated forestry and rural resource. The proposal involves a mix of residential and camping opportunities through the zoning, which you've seen in your reports. The proposed subdivision would involve a total of 10 1-hectare lots in conformance with the existing zoning, well, the proposed zoning. Zoning, again, I've already touched on this, but you'll see it in front of your own eyes with the map. The big polygon in the middle of the map is the 10-hectare site, existing F1 forest resource. Proposed, this is a new zoning category, a new zone, RR1 recreation residential, something new for this electoral area. Official community plan is, again, as mentioned, existing forestry natural resource, sometimes termed rural resource. It's currently proposes recreation residential, again, a new designation in the OCP. And finally, there's also a new development permit area, a DPA, proposed that would facilitate this type of development. It's called a wildfire protection development permit area, largely intended to ensure that the mitigation measures and any construction that occurs on the site would follow guidelines that are appropriate for properties located in high wildfire interface zones. There's some more details, I suppose. On the left, current zoning. By comparison, proposed zoning on your right, and I think the most important thing to take away from this particular slide is the definition of private camping space, which is in additional to the other principal uses that are proposed for the zone, agriculture and single-family dwelling, in part largely continuation of existing historical uses on the site. But private camping space, again, this is a new definition in the zoning bylaw, would mean a designated area intended for the exclusive temporary occupancy of one tent or one recreational vehicle or park model mobile home that is equipped with a sewage disposal system compliant with the sewage system regulation or otherwise authorized by Island Health. And the final matter, I'll add something that's not on this slide. I apologize. I thought there was another slide that speaks to the fact that in the parcels that are proposed, there would be allowance for one single detached home and one private camping space, or no more than 2 camping spaces if there's no single family detached home. That is the level of development that would be allowable under the proposed zoning bylaw. I have nothing else if there's any questions.
Thank you. I just a quick question for process. I've got you, Director Yanni DiNardo. Have the applicants provided staff with the new information that they proposed to present to us today?
Yes, via email, staff last week received new information regarding the relative to the application. It was, we've received it. I'll leave it at that.
Hasn't been included in the agenda, though.
It has not because
That's all.
No.
Director Yanni DiNardo, question for staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is great, actually looking at around the lake needs to be looked at for recreation and residential. So I'm really happy to see a zone, RR1, that's great. And so will there be, not connected to this, but in the future, a lake plan? Like, is that in the works at all?
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. That's a really timely and important question. So it is on land use, the community planning's work plan. However, that's been supplanted by all of the other planning work that's being done. I would suggest that the benefit of such a plan is it will help coordinate the long-term evolution of land use around the lake, and in the absence of such a lake plan, you are left with dealing with matters on a case-by-case basis.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think that it is really critical with the development that's happening and the pressures that's going to be on our community, that this recreational and residential zones and more of them, that you're looking at the lake as a whole identity.
Thank you. Director, I've got Director Nicholson. Did you have a question? Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I was wondering if there's a limit to how big a house you can build on these 1 acre lots.
Mr. Batstone?
Yes, a limit has been established in the draft bylaw. I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertip. I believe there a building footprint of 120 square meters, gross floor area of 240 square meters, and no more than, I think it was 20% site coverage, which would be well beyond those numbers.
Director Acton, question for staff?
Thank you. I have two. There was a few times where you said new zoning, new this. I don't have the old application in front of us. Can you just highlight exactly what has changed from the last time it was here to now?
Director Acton, nothing. We've done a site visit.
That's it.
Yep.
That's what I thought.
Second
Clarifying
question?
that. Second question. The MOTI, the road allowance, or this piece that's, I think it was 20 meters for lake access, and I know in Shawnigan, lake access is a huge bonus to the community, but it's, the way it's worded, I'm trying to find it again, it was kind of ambiguous whether it was gonna happen or not. So is that, is it actually just a road end that's being dedicated that we're not sure if it's even gonna happen? It says,
Point 2 in your report, page 2.
page 2.
Series of bullets.
Sorry. Yes.
Second bullet.
Okay, so it's a 20-meter wide road allowance, but it says the applicants intend to work with the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure and CVRD, so it can be, instead be dedicated to CVRD as parkland. So is that a given? Is that gonna happen for sure? Is that?
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. That requirement, and I believe, I stand to be corrected, because I haven't done this for a while now in terms of subdividing in regional districts, but it's either 6 or 800 meters. It's required. So the provincial approving officer with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure must require access to water bodies every, I think it's 600 meters, isn't it? So there is some, in my experience, flexibility around what that looks like and how it can function. And so my understanding is, and I defer to you, Mr. Tippett, then, perhaps you know, whether or not they're going to be inclined to include that as park space rather than a formal road access. That said, it would likely be an unbuilt road access rather than a constructed road access. It's just as intended to provide a corridor of legal access to a water body.
Follow-up?
So is there no parkland dedication with this kind of subdivision then?
Mr. Batstone?
To my knowledge, not as currently proposed through the applicant, by the applicant.
But there is an amenity being provided.
Yes, I apologize.
Alternate Director Morris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Curious if there's been a public hearing regarding this, and if so, what the input was.
Mr. Batstone?
No, a public hearing would be forthcoming if the board supported this application.
Alternate Director Salmon, followed by Acton.
So the staff report, just two questions really. One, the letter from Cowichan Tribes in February, has there been a response to that?
I apologize, I don't have the correspondence received. My reading is that February 7th correspondence was received. It has not been attached to this.
Maybe I'll save that for the applicant then.
They may be able to speak better
I'm
to it.
strongly opposed Second question, so just to get the time, so from that page 2, so June 2017, recommendation to deny. November 2017, recommendation to deny. February 2018, committee recommend deny. What have we changed now? Or what's the recommendation now?
I think the way to characterize this report is that staff isn't recommending anything. We have no opinion on the matter right now. We are seeking direction resulting from the discussion that has
It's committee
emerged
decision time.
and been informed by the June 11th events.
I've got Directors Acton and Yanni DiNardo. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I find these applications a little problematic in the sense where I can't see the value to the community. And
Director Acton, we don't have a motion on the floor yet.
I know.
Is this a question for staff?
it was just a bit of a reminder I wanted to mention.
Can you hold it
Can
until
I
we
hold
have a
on?
resolution on the floor? Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo, question for staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, for me, just answering alternate director Salmon, was the site visit. Going on site makes a huge difference, and also, if you look on that map, you see development on both sides, and seeing that and thinking to the future, that I think this is a way, there is going to be growth, and this is a way to control it, which there hasn't been. I mean, currently, you gotta look out for 50 years, or at least that, so I'm seeing it in a different light after we took the site visit, so that's what's changed for me.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff? Alternate Director Morris.
Thank you. And just confirming, with regards to February 14th, back to staff to identify options. Were any options put forward?
Mr. Batstow.
The way I would describe it is that a conversation happened between staff and the applicant. As I understand it, the only option to move forward was to convene a site visit and have further conversations and take those learnings forward in the decision-making process. Nothing more than that.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you. So as you can tell, it's a rather vague resolution, not particularly helpful in terms of providing direction. The fact of the matter is there aren't very many options associated with a situation like this, other than minor tweaks one way or the other. But the substantive aspects of this application are difficult to provide options around. It's either yes or no. Again, it's in the finer details where there may be opportunities for those discussions, and as Mr. Bathstone indicated, that those discussions did happen, and perhaps the applicant has some, with this additional information, more for the committee to consider.
And that's where I'm going next. So seeing no more questions for staff, could I ask if the applicants have anything to add or provide us with some new information? And Jim, I'm going to ask if you can not recap, but give us the new information and anything that might help the new alternate directors be more informed. Thank you.
There, I'm on. First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. I'm aware of your time constraints. I think, however, given there seems to be a bit of confusion around some of the things that have been handled, for example, there was questions around limited, footprint buildings, and the zoning bylaw itself does contain a limited footprint residence as well as a limited footprint accessory building. I think what we were pointing out to on the site visit is that under the current site coverage, we could build 270,000 square feet of building space. And with the proposal, the way the bylaw reads, the site coverage is under 10% of the entire site with limited footprint buildings and limited footprint accessory buildings. But I did want to say thank you to the members of the board that did, the directors rather, that did come out. I think the site visit was worthwhile from the point of view, I think it showed the environmental stewardship that's been implemented on most of the property. We know that that will be further enhanced with the SPIA that comes about as a result of the RAR. We were also asked at one time to consider increasing building setbacks from the lake, and we have increased the building setback from the lake, which is normally, from high water rather, which is normally 15 meters, and we're going to 20, and we did show those area directors where that was on the property when they did the site visit. What we are asking for, of course, is for the application to go to public hearing, and I heard a question being asked, has this been to public hearing? And that's what we're asking for, is at least for consideration, to have the public have input into what it is that we want to do. We did conduct a public information meeting in November of 2015 prior to making the application, so we can all do the math. This application has been under discussion for quite a while. We heard also mention about a lake study, and when the applicants put this before the CVRD in 2008, a lake study was talked about then, was imminent, and hasn't happened, and so these folks have been waiting for that, and that time ticks on. So since the original application, they made an application in 2005, another application in 2008. 13 years has come and gone. These buildings or homes that the people are going to be building are going to be owner-occupied. None of these people are developers. None of them have very deep pockets. And so when it comes to amenities, you know, we did increase the amenity at the last meeting to $75,000, and that wasn't reflected in the staff report, and I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And also, we had committed as well to not building any further docks on the property. We will find a way through agreements to share docks. A question was being asked about public access. It's actually every 400 meters is what it's required. And we have approximately 1,400 meters of frontage. And so we're very close to actually not even having to dedicate access to the water. However, that being said, there is proposed to be a 20-meter access at the far end of the lake. And what we have suggested is, as with other applications that the CVRD have dealt with, you have supported a waiver of access to navigable water. And you did it in the Woodland Shore subdivision to quite an extent. And what we have said is that we would be seeking at the time of subdivision a request to waive the access to navigable water. And I think the premise of the ask on that waiver is, to the west of us and to the east of us, in the 100-lot subdivision to the east and the 45-lot subdivision to the west, there are about 5 points of public access to the lake, none of which have been developed yet for public access. There is public access on the west side of our property. It's a 10-meter strip that goes down to the lake. So if we were to get the waiver, we're saying that we would dedicate that 20 meters as park. And there was a question asked, well, is there nothing else happening over and above that? We also said that we would give you, in addition, we'll give you a 5% compensation in lieu. So what we're saying in terms of, there's a $75,000 amenity, 5% of the assessed value of the land, which incidentally went up 58% in the last assessment. So 5% of that will be contributed to the CVRD in terms of compensation in lieu. Plus we will dedicate park if we can get the waiver on the dedication to navigable water. In terms of value to the community, we think there's a considerable value to the community. Right now there's one lot paying taxes. There'll be 10 lots paying taxes. So there's a direct financial benefit to the community. We also heard previously from the RCMP about concerns over activity in the area, and we feel that, you know, having these lots there's more public eyes on what's going on in that area. So we think that there are advantages over and above the financial advantages. There are advantages to the community. There's the compensation in lieu of park there's a $75,000 amenity, and there's potentially an additional park to be dedicated at the west end of the property. I just wanted to point out as well that should the rezoning proceed and is successful, there are many, many more hoops for the applicants to go through. They have to apply for subdivision, and there are regulatory requirements in the subdivision. And as we've seen today in your two previous applications, there's development permits required at the time of building permit. And so there's also going to be further environmental review on each individual building permit application for those applicants that wish to build a home on the property. So we are, again, to repeat, we are simply asking for the directors to support our application to go forward, to public hearing for consideration. And I'd be prepared to answer any questions. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you for your recap, and go to directors for questions for the applicants. Alternate Director Salmon.
My earlier question on the Cowichan First Nation?
Pardon me?
My earlier question about the Cowichan First Nation letter that was
Can you repeat the question?
It was strongly opposed to the development,
And what's your question?
did you respond?
Did we respond to Cowichan tribes? No, we didn't respond to Cowichan tribes. We received that letter in an information package, much like area directors did. I did ask Cowichan tribes for a further meeting to discuss the contents of that letter, and we were denied.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the applicants? Director Acton.
So, sorry, this 5% contribution of land value, or assessed value, is this new? This is not in here.
No, it's not new.
It's not new?
No.
No,
Oh,
it's
I
not
missed
new,
it?
sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Any further questions for the applicants? Alternate Director Salmon.
And just to follow up on the amenity.
Could you pull
so-
your microphone a little closer, please?
So could you just explain again the amenity? So it's 75,000 plus potentially.
Well, not potentially. We're committed to $75,000 as an amenity, and we are also committed to giving the CVRD 5% compensation in lieu of parkland dedication. Just hold that thought for a minute. But what we've also said is that we would be looking to the CVRD, and this will happen, I think, at the staff level rather than at the director's level, for the staff to support us in a waiver of the access to navigable water, which is also permitted under the Land Title Act. So it's not unusual for subdivisions to be approved with what they call access by water only, or where access to the water has been waived. And a good example of that for the board would be the entire Woodland Shores development. All of the access to navigable water was waived.
Okay, so if
Yeah.
staff supports that, then the 5%.
It still comes to the CVRD.
And what's the dollar figure of what?
The last assessment, I think it was around $43,000. So it's legislated at 5% of the assessed value of the property.
Okay, so 75,000 plus.
Plus the 43,000. Yeah.
Okay. So $12,000 a lot.
Correct.
Doesn't seem like a lot for waterfront lots.
Well, I think, I guess if this was a piece of property that this group of individuals had purchased on a speculative basis, it might not seem like a lot of money because, if you speculate and you're going to subdivide it and you're going to sell the lots and you can build all of the amounts of, all the costs back into your recovery, then, that makes sense. But what we're talking about is 10 people who have been living on the property, some since 1963, who are currently living in a cooperative style of ownership that really would like to have fee simple so that they're not having to be beholding, if you want, to anybody else within the cooperative. We've had this discussion before. There is provision in the documentation that they have, their agreement, that they can't simply sell their share or their interest in the cooperative without going first to the entire cooperative to see if somebody within the cooperative wants to buy it. So we made the statement previously that there was some issues with estate planning. And this, of course, came back to us, from Cowichan Tribe suggesting, well, that's a misleading statement. They can do whatever they want in a tenancy in common, or they can will it in their they can transfer it in their will. Well, no, they can't. It's restricted in the documentation. So that's one of the reasons they want to be able to go to fee simple. So in terms of the amount of money, may not seem significant, but some of these people are simply going to continue to live on that property 3 months of the year in their trailer, and it would be a financial burden for them to probably go much higher.
Just follow up once more.
Can I go to Director Acton? I'll come back to you. Director Acton?
Yeah, I guess I really hate these amenity conversations, but it's unfortunate that you haven't chosen to dedicate some parkland. That seemed like a really big piece of property just to give a little bit so that the community could have some lake access. To say that there's these odd points of lake access, those are just MOT, but to have like a real park that's gives people more access. I'm sure like even now people in the community want more lake access, and in the future it's going to be even higher.
I would agree. And I would strongly recommend that the CVRD take a strong look at creating a regional park at Lake Cowichan, as you have done in many, many other areas of the community. You have them in Ladysmith, you have them in Sansom Narrows. And for me, I'm thinking Lake Cowichan is just an obvious for a regional park, not a 1.5 acre or a 2 acre park, but a 3, 4, 5, or 600 acre park. That would be something that would be utilized and purchased, if you want, under the regional parks plan.
So just remind directors that this is questions for the applicant. The point that he's made around Cowichan Lake shoreline is one of the priorities for the Regional Parkland Acquisition Fund, and I'd like to go back to questions for the applicant. We do not have a resolution on the floor, and we can have that discussion and debate in a few minutes, but any more questions for the applicant? Any more?
Just one other thing I would clarify, that the site coverage that I had said was under 10% when we have limited footprint buildings and accessory buildings, it actually calculates at around 3%. Yeah, so.
Alternate Director Salmon.
Just quickly, so just on the structure of the existing co-op, what does happen when the...
So in the co-op agreement, I didn't bring my whole file, but in the co-op agreement, there's provision in there that if you want to dispose of your interest in the property, you first of all have to present an option to anybody that's currently within the co-op to have that first option. So that is somewhat restrictive in terms of how people deal with their shares. Yeah.
Any further questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Turn to the director for the area.
I'm prepared to put forward a motion. I move to option number 1 with a correction. I would like to increase the amount of the amenities to 100,000. And also, what wasn't mentioned in the report here, what the applicants told me, was that they committed not to build any further docks on their property. So that's would be added to the motion.
Hang on for just a second. I'm just looking over to our parliamentarian. How might we incorporate those two items into a resolution that, or an option that we have before us? Have you written those out, Director Kuhn?
Yeah, to increase the amount of amenities, which is stated in the report at 50,000, but it wasn't. It was actually 75,000. I'd like to have that increased to 100,000, and also that the applicants committed not to build any further docks on their properties.
Well, I'm going to want to have this read out. Oh, Mr. Tippett.
Mr. Chair, we have to be careful when dealing with amenities in this case. This was a proposal brought forward by the applicant. It's not sort of a statutory power that we have to assign an amenity value to something. It's essentially a voluntary contribution that the applicant has made. And so I don't think it's appropriate for the committee to establish what an appropriate amenity is in this case unless we're going to construct a zone that has built-in amenity provisions that assign some base density, and then if you provide a certain amenity of a defined value written right into the zoning bylaw itself, then additional density can be granted. So because there's already a zone drafted, and it's not an amenity zone, we ought not to, basically the applicants have offered 75,000. I don't think it's appropriate for the committee to try and up that.
I've discussed it with the applicants.
And the provision about the restriction on docks, we don't have that in writing either, do we? Has that been part of any? So we've had a verbal moving of a recommendation with some alteration to it. And I see Mr. Blackwell would like to add something.
So I'm going to defer to Ms. Harrison on this one, but there's another way around this, and that is to present this information at public hearing. And then it's just if there's an appetite to go to public hearing, and then based on all of the information you receive from public hearing, you would then consider all of that information going forward, either to move forward with the application or to not. That way you don't have to construct something that's a bit awkward as a resolution.
I'd really like to have some clarity here because we just had the applicant get up and state 75,000 and the director's stating 100, and we're getting wording for our recommendation from staff that we don't on the fly alter amounts. And I would much prefer to have a resolution that we can all read and clearly understand, not do this on the fly. Turn to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just clarifying, just seems, I would prefer that this resolution, as it is in our package, be moved, and then from a public hearing, I much prefer that way than on the fly making up, I want this, I want that. This is very awkward to me, so I don't feel comfortable with this resolution that's being put on the floor like this. I'm perfectly comfortable with the resolution to move forward to a public hearing.
I'm going to turn to Ms. Harrison and ask what her recommended course of action would be on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a mover. We don't have a seconder.
Correct.
So this motion could be lost due to the absence of a seconder, and a new recommendation could be put forward.
So I'm looking for a seconder.
Yeah. You moved?
I'm not seconding your resolution.
No.
There's a new resolution.
Oh, I see, okay, yep.
Motion fails due to lack of seconder. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Move the recommendation in our package.
Second.
The motion has been duly moved and seconded. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just point of clarification, you're talking about option 1.
Yes.
Correct.
Any discussion, debate on this resolution? Director Dory.
I'm sure others will weigh in on it. I went on the site visit and was fairly impressed with what they've done with the property over the years. They sort of have a loosely knit group of cooperative people that are living on 10 parcels of land, and they're already using it. So if you look to the west of this property or look to the east I think has 100 lots, and the west has 45, and this one has 10. If you look at that, you say, now this density is way less than the others, Maybe they made mistakes in the past on the lake. Maybe they overdid it. But just being on the property, there's lots of space. So they're not really increasing the use because they have a cabin or they have a trailer or they have a camp space. So they're basically using the same amount of property, going forward if this passes as they were. And they've done it for years. So they've adjusted to the situation, and they actually semi-control each other as according to use. So I thought that was a good thing. So they sort of have self-governance at this point in time, but I guess as properties sell, as they would be less telling each other what to do or how to live. So if you looked at the greater Lake Cowichan plan, I think this is a pretty good example of what you might see. I know environmentalists might say there should be nothing on the lake other than water and fish and that sort of thing. But being realistic, I think the pressure is to do something. And if you do something now that's low impact, I think you're setting a precedent for other areas. You're not setting a precedent that maybe you shouldn't do anything, but you're setting a precedent if you do something, make sure that it's well thought out. They're respecting the SPIA. You could have a whole parkland along the lake edge where the SPIA is, and it wouldn't make any difference because the only people who are going to use it or walk through it or be there are the residents. They're sharing the docks. The 75 or 50 or whatever money they dedicated could go to parkland, so they're providing parkland, and they're required by law to put 5% up, and I think that's why it wasn't mentioned in there, because it's always the case. So I think this is a pretty good attempt to respect the environment and to develop in a way that is sensible, and also it's a way things that might go that way in the future. So I'm in for this, and I think the applicants have talked to the CVRD with a lot of good sense, and they have been respectful of what we're doing and what we intend to do. So I think this should move forward. At least the people of Yubo and the Area I people can weigh in again on it because of all the different benefits, the access to the lake, the respect of the waterfront. Thank you.
Director Nicholson.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I got you on the list.
I am going to vote against this. It's, I always have to remind myself we're not, we're voting for a land use, not for the people who are currently good stewards of their property. But I think what's most important to me about this issue is the lake itself, and I think we need to start looking forward and not planning as we used to in the past instead of looking backwards. And I think a good example is the fact that we need to think about climate change seriously and not depend on what we have experienced in the past as far as our climate goes. The lake level, the flooding risk is going to definitely increase. The wildfire risk is definitely going to increase. The sustainability of that lake over time, I think, is more threatened now, and at least Lake Cowichan is in fairly good shape, and we should keep it that way. The current OCP, the current plan we have to guide us on this decision, does not allow, it suggests no development past in this area, no further development. And so I think that without a good lake plan in place, really we have to rely on what has been considered before. First Nations are definitely against this, and I think we also need to be extremely respectful as we look forward to what they think about things like this. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to vote against this.
Thank you. I've got Director Acton and myself on the list. Director Acton?
I guess I'm stuck on the value to the community, and I feel like that is our role here. If we're willing to give up, because giving up an F1 to a residential, this is it's not like you have a right to do that. It's a gift. So and there's a loss, like Director Nicholson spoke of. So in order to gain that loss, or to take on that loss, what does the community gain? And in a public hearing, the community won't initiate those conversations, and I really find these conversations problematic, and so I have something that I'd like to discuss once this is finished being discussed, and I've spoke to the chair about it, so I'd like that opportunity. And so I looked up the assessment value of this property, and it's $1.2 million. It divided by 10, now they're worth $500,000 a lot, and the loss to the community could be tax dollars for the last 20 years, contribution to the community center. Like, this is a huge win, regardless whether some of these applicants, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm finding it problematic for the gains and loss here.
Thank you. I've got myself on the list next. So, firstly, I want to congratulate the applicants on a fairly well put together case for their rezoning. I seriously considered whether or not I would attend the site visit. I think the site visit has achieved exactly what was intended. It would not only give directors a view on the ground, but also exposure to the people involved, and this is somewhat of a dispassionate exercise that we should be engaging in, and so again, well done to the applicants for managing their way through this system. I know it's been a long time activity. I know that we've got some bigger issues, and I think we've had some comments about whether or not a lake plan is appropriate now, and I absolutely believe that it is, and I don't know what the long-term circumstances of moving this forward or not will be. I think that we are facing a further alienation of the public's access and ownership and use of our waterfront, and whether or not this particular application plays a big role in that being furthered or not, I don't know. That we're not talking about a speculative developer that's come in and bought a piece of property and is looking to flip it. There's been some long time investment by individuals who love the land, and it's evident when we went on the site visit that they're very concerned about the riparian area, and they have a beautiful spot and they know it and they seem to take pretty good care of it. I think where I'm just having a challenge is that given that we need to have both Area I, Town Lake Couch, and Area F come together for a bigger picture analysis. I get a sense that if we approve this, it's a bit of a capitulation on our part that there's an application, they want to get this done. I don't think that delaying it any further is a wise move. I think that a decision delayed is a decision denied, essentially. So this is not what I see as the best application that we could be considering, but you know what? This is what the applicants have brought forward and given to us to consider, so that's what we have to consider. With that, I think I'll end my comments there and ask if there's any other discussion or debate on this matter. Director Kuhn.
I just wonder, in the application here, the amenities mentioned at 50,000, has that been corrected to 75? Because that's what the applicants actually mentioned. And that should be in there.
Ms. Harrison or Mr. Tippett, do we have, what amount do we have in there? Mr. Batstone. What is the definitive number?
I believe staff can accept the email that was received post today's report deadline as as a portion of the application. And I would specifically cite under option 1 that's being discussed right now, provision 3, that covenants be drafted to secure proposed amenities. So if Development Services accepts the email as a proposed revision to the application, then we'd capture it right there.
And that figure is?
$75,000 according to the email that I've received.
Okay.
As well as the commitment to not develop further docks.
Thank you. Any further discussion, debate? Director Dory.
Yeah, 2 points. One, the Fire Smart, I talked to Jason DeJong about the property. And the property does have a lot of maple and alder on it, which are not real flammable trees. They're not like your firs and balsam and cedar. So the only problem with maple and alder is sometimes you get leaves on the ground. If they're controlled, that's a pretty good thing. And the second thing is I think it should go to the people of Area I or UBO and let them weigh in on it. We're denying them the opportunity to participate in their community. So that's my point of view. Thank you.
Director Kuhn?
Yeah, we'll just leave it as it is. Thank you.
Anything further? Question's been asked. Call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. That will go to the next board meeting on Wednesday, July 11th. Next item. Oops. Is R4. And Mr. Farquhar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Hang on, just before we go there, Director Acton.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to have the opportunity to talk about our process of the amenities. And we seem to have a set process for parks contribution, but I wanted to just, perhaps Mr. Blackwell could speak of this more eloquently, but in other areas, they have more of a set amenities for rezonings. So if we were willing to ask staff to look at some of those.
Perhaps could you read out your resolution and
Sure.
we'll see if we
And
can
my
just
resolution
dispatch
is
of this quickly?
That staff investigate options for the establishment of a community amenity bylaw.
Is there a seconder? Motion seconded. Do we need any clarification? We don't. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. Next item, Mr. Farquhar, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for the committee. Before you, this is in furtherance to appearance in front of the board last week by the Saltaire Community Society as a delegation, providing an update on the activities at the Saltaire Community Centre in Electoral Area G. And they're asked before you for several things related to their continuance of the operation of the Saltaire Community Centre. In particular, they are asking for an amendment to their existing building lease that would allow them to take over the operation and inclusion of the gymnasium, which currently is excluded from their use of the building. As you'll know in the report, through the expense of the society itself, they had a mold abatement company come in and do some treatment, and the follow-up tests have concluded that the air quality inside is as good or better than what exists on the outside now. So it would appear that the abatement works that were done have been successful. They've also had a separate test that was done that determined that the existing ceiling tiles have no hazardous materials in them, and they certainly would like to address those because a few have fallen down over the years, and they'd like to be able to deal with that issue as well. But under the provisions of the existing building lease with the society, the CBRD, through the board's direction, has the capacity to amend the lease to include the gymnasium for allowance for the society to use it for activities. In addition, because the current building lease expires at the end of this year, December 31st, there are other provisions in the building lease that allow for the CVRD and the society to proceed with a renewal. And the society is asking, by way of the letter in your package, for a 5-year renewal for the building lease that would commence upon completion of the existing building lease with a 5-year renewal term. And the third element in your report before you is that they are asking that given the cost for redoing the roof and remediating the flood work or the damage as a result of leaks in the roof that the board previously approved up to $300,000 through the Solitaire Recreation Function, because those costs have come in under, the society is asking for board's approval to apply the remainder funds, which is approximately $75,000, to apply towards replacement out of up to 3 oil furnaces and dealing with the ceiling tiles in the gymnasium. And you'll note in the staff report that the original direction of the board with respect to gas tax funding in Solitaire for these funds was to put towards the Solitaire Community Centre for dealing with energy efficiency. So the intentions of the society for application of some of those gas tax funds would be for application to the board's original intention for those funds. So there's 3 recommendations before you, but first of all, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions of the committee that I'm capable of answering, I'll happily do that. Otherwise, the report's in front of you along with the letter asked from the society.
Thank you, Mr. Farquhar. Does committee have any questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
Should I assume that they just pay $1 a year or something for the lease, or how does that work?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. It is a $1 a year lease.
Thank you. Is that a question you have, Director Dory? Okay, hang on. Were you going to move the recommendation? Is there a seconder?
I'll move the recommendation.
Second by Director Marcotte. Mr. Blackwell, would you please read the recommendation for R4?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is a 3-part recommendation, and it goes as follows. That it be recommended to the board, 1, that the existing lease of building with the Solitaire Community Society for the Solitaire Community Centre be approved for amendment to include access and use of the gymnasium per the terms and conditions of Section 1.2 of the lease agreement. 2, that a 5-year lease of building agreement with renewal clause and a 5-year agreement of services with the Solitaire Community Society, both commencing January 1st, 2019, be approved for continued operation of the Solitaire Community Centre upon expiry of the current agreements ending December 31st, 2018. And 3, that $75,000 in Community Works gas tax funding in the 2018 capital budget under Function 456, Recreation Solitaire, for replacement of the roofing system and interior rehabilitation work at the Solitaire Community Centre, be approved for expenditure on replacement of oil-fired furnaces and gymnasium ceiling tiles at the centre, as requested by the Solitaire Community Society.
That recommendation's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries. That too will go to the next board meeting on Wednesday, July 11th. Next item, R5. Mr. Hatami.
Good afternoon. The purpose of this R5 report is to provide the committee with information about the CVRD's curbside garbage and recycling collection smartphone application. Just a little bit of background that we mail out about 15,000 calendars per year to the residents, and any temporary changes to the calendar will be informed, will be given, or those changes will be informed or communicated to the residents via our website or through social media. The mentioned application will provide us with a specific area calendar, provides us with notifications that can go to the residents for any changes via text, phone messages, or email. And also, it's going to provide them with the next pickup date or pickup time. And it provides the option for printing the calendar. And also, it promotes actually the Recyclopedia for better recycling practices and improves the customer service. The cost of providing this application or this app services is $7,500 versus the $10,000 cost of printing the calendars, mailing it out, not including the staff time. So that's basically it, and what we are doing, actually working through our IT division, and pilot project for tests will be ready in second week of August, and we try to launch it for September. Meanwhile, there would be a transition, so we're gonna keep actually those hard copies. In case, some residents actually need that, we provide them with that. If you need any more detailed information, so I have Ms. Boyle here, can answer your questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? This is an information item only. I had a brief discussion with Mr. Hatami. I think we're going to have to transition over from this to the new platform, and they've indicated that there will still be hard copies available, and as we transition, and I think a little bit of effort on our part to make sure that the message gets out will help this be a smooth launch. And are there, seeing no hands or questions, or Director Dory, you're looking like you want to, but if you don't have to, don't.
Okay.
Thank
I just
you.
think I think it can be a wonderful thing.
It's going to be a wonderful thing. Thank you very much, Mr. Hatami. R6.
Oh, it's me again. R6, actually, through this report, the staff is requesting an adjustment to the scope of the previously approved CWF fund for engineering analysis and energy saving implementation project. Just a reminder that this project received the board approval sometimes in July 2013, and it allowed us to spend $26,000 for 6 buildings. The project completed, and what is left over is over $6,000, $6,753, and our water division would like to actually access this fund for conducting similar study for the Twin Cedar wastewater treatment plant upgrade.
Any questions for staff? There's a recommendation. Director Nicholson.
Why the Twin Cedars? Are there any other options?
Well, because, the Twin Cedar upgrade, and we want to actually set a sort of standard for any upgrade we do, and that happened that Twin Cedar was the first one. Any upgrade we do to our infrastructure, energy is part of it. We have to do this kind of analysis and find out the most efficient, actually, options that we have for our design. So it happened that it was actually on our radar screen, decided to include that.
Turn to the alternate director for I think that's your area, isn't it? Would you like to move the recommendation? Moved, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Mr. Blackwell, would you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that unspent funds from the Community Works Fund Engineering Analysis and Energy Savings Implementation Plan project in the amount of $6,753 be approved to include analysis for the Twin Cedars wastewater plant upgrade.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor and those opposed, that motion carries, and 2 will go to the Wednesday, July 11th board meeting. Mr. Blackwell, any unfinished business?
There is no unfinished business.
Any new business?
And no new business.
Next is question period, and I'd just like to update the committee and people watching at home. At the last meeting, I was asked a question in regards to the soil deposit bylaw, and staff have provided me with this information that it has been referred to the Ministry of Environment for approval, which is required before it can be adopted by the board. Ministry of Environment staff expressed some concern with aspects of the bylaw related to how contaminated soil is addressed. CVRD legal counsel is now reviewing this input and is preparing for some recommended changes for addressing the ministry's concern. In addition, in May, staff were directed by the board to prepare other changes to the bylaw to shift the emphasis to larger fill sites and to assist with implementation. Those changes are now largely complete and are being reviewed by legal counsel. Once the proposed amendments are finalized, the bylaw will come back to Electoral Area Services Committee and the board for review and reconsideration of first and second reading and bylaw adoption. With that, are there any questions from people in the gallery for the chair?
Thank you for that information, Mr. Chair. I believe at the last Electoral Area Services Committee meeting, I asked about when applications like we've seen today where unnamed, unmapped streams have been identified as part of a development permit application, how that information is being assimilated and put into the CVRD's GSI system, I guess. GIS system. And I don't believe, I'm asking the question again because it seems very pertinent when we're talking about streams that feed into fish-bearing streams. There should be a way that this information that could be collected.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I looked to staff for backup on this, that the committee, no, the board has authorized in some preliminary budget discussions an upgrade to our GIS and mapping function, and I got a nod on that one. So that will be assisting us in the level of detail for exactly that question you asked.
So there will be a process in place where
Yes.
these are identified through the system?
To the extent that we can, yes.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has any questions?
Mr. Chair, on R3, there were a couple of figures thrown around on the worth of the property, and there was going to be 5% amenity given in lieu of parkland, 5%, and I believe the owner said the value of the property assessed at $40,000, and then I heard from Sierra Director Sierra Acton a price of $1,200,000. Which is it?
Hang on. It's almost an irrelevant question. There's been an amenity offer made by the applicant. We can choose to accept that amenity, or we can ask for 5% parkland. And so how that was come to, how that had come to pass is, I'm not aware of the specifics, but currently we have a $75,000 amenity offer, and that's what we're considering, not a percentage of value or the likes.
But Mr. Chair, was there not a discussion about access to the lake? And so instead of access, public access
Directors, please.
to the lake, were they not going to give 5% of the value of the property?
You asked the question, was there an issue around access to the lake? Yes, that's a separate issue.
So that will be taken into consideration before.
There is a provision for 5% parkland dedication in certain circumstances, but what was being discussed was that question and also the MOTI requirement for access to the lake every 600 meters. Separate issues.
From what I understood, the owner said that the property was assessed at 40,000, 5% of, pardon me?
Yeah,
Oh, that was 5% of the price. The 40,000. It's not, the property's not worth 40,000 and we were going to get 5%? Because that'd only be $2,000.
that's not the information I was working off of. I was working off the information in the staff report. Directors, please. And they're relevant. There's been an amenity offer, which we can choose to take, or we can choose to ask for 5% parkland.
I hope we don't give up the public access. Public access, I think, is very, very important to the public. Mr. Chair, also, I didn't see any communication to the Cowichan tribes. What were the, what did the Cowichan tribes want that was not happening? I didn't hear any solution to the Cowichan tribes queries.
That's correct.
So will that be addressed?
I believe the committee has just voted to move this application forward.
I would think that it would be very important that we have communication with the Cowichan tribes on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any further questions?
As I made a presentation regarding the UBCM resolution and the deadline has passed, I would like to know if staff will be looking at the possibility of it being presented at UBCM as an urgent need.
We can certainly inquire with staff, but my understanding of the resolutions process is that it would probably not qualify because it has to be deemed to be an unforeseen or unknown issue at the time that are following the deadline. So I can't imagine if it were submitted that it would meet the burden of the test that the resolutions committee would put to it.
And the second question would then be, why has the board and this committee not put forward such a resolution to assist?
You likely have to ask your area director afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for the committee? Seeing none, I think the next item on the agenda is a resolution to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries.